What's up, everyone? Welcome to Hollywood Unveiled, where we pull back the curtain on the Hollywood entertainment industry and get to know the people behind the magic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Logan.
And Logan, today we are going to pull back the curtain on one of our favorite films, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? This film was a technological marvel for its time, making huge innovations in the world of animation and special effects, also earning itself 3 Academy Awards in Best Visual Effects, Film Editing, Sound Editing, plus the Special Achievement Academy Award in Animation Direction given to Richard Williams.
It's Roger Rabbit. It is one of those movies that I can't think of a single person who genuinely dislikes the movie.
I know, right?
It is one that, on paper, is kind of shocking that it works as well as it does, but it works. So if you haven't seen Roger Rabbit, because you're a sociopath, it is about a down-on-his-luck private eye named Eddie Valiant, who gets hired by a cartoon producer, R.K. Maroon, to investigate an adultery scandal involving Jessica Rabbit, the sultry wife of Maroon's biggest star, Roger Rabbit. But when Marvin Acme, Jessica's alleged paramour and the owner of Toontown, is found murdered, the villainous Judge Doom vows to catch and destroy Roger. And you got a great cast going for the movie. You obviously have Bob Hoskins as Eddie Valiant, Christopher Lloyd as Judge Doom, Joanna Cassidy as Dolores, Charles Fleischer as Roger Rabbit, and Kathleen Turner as Jessica.
Just fun fact for myself, as far as I can remember, at least, I believe this might have been the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater back in 1988. Taking me back a bit, that was probably about 4 at the time, going on 5. So
cool. I hadn't been born yet.
I
was there before the end of the decade.
Oh yeah, there you go. But my parents, for whatever reason, thought. I mean, it looked like probably in the trailers, it looked like something that a 4 or 5-year-old would love, and I absolutely did. Right up until Judge Doom started to turn into a tune at the end. And,
well, that is nightmare-inducing. But I do think that kids' movies in that era were also allowed to be a little spooky. They were allowed to be free. Like look at The Witches with Angelica Houston. Like, it's a great movie. It works, but it also works for kids because in watching it, you feel as scared of those monsters as the kids do, no matter your age. Yeah. So you instantly sympathize. So I think kids' movies can be a little scary.
What do you remember what age you were when you saw this one?
I don't. My most prominent memory of this movie, and I feel bad putting my sister on blast like this. It was.
Well, that's why we're here.
We were on a road trip, and this was the era when they had just put like either the VCRs or the DVD players in like minivans. And as we were driving somewhere, and she got motion sick in the car right when, spoiler alert, Judge Doom gets doused in dip.
Oh,
so I remember us pulling over to the side of the road so my parents could help her clean that up. While I was watching all of the tunes circle around singing "Smile, darn ya, smile," and I'm like, "This is a weird memory. This is gonna be with me for a while."
Clearly,
it's still there. So
that's the soundtrack of getting sick for her now. So.
Apparently, and a running joke in our family when it comes to a Subway order. So
this is an awesome landmark movie in many ways. Directed by Robert Zemeckis. He was really trying to land this movie when he only had 2 films under his belt. I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars, and both of those films at the time were actually flops.
Critics liked them, but they didn't really land with audiences. Exactly,
right. And it wasn't until Back to the Future that they were like, oh, wait a minute. And I really think his filmography since then, really since Back to the Future, every film he's done, whether you like them or not, each one of them really pushed the needle forward technologically or in the world of filmmaking in general, in some way, shape, or form. They had something to say. And Roger Rabbit was really one of those as well.
Yeah, every movie Zemeckis has done post Back to the Future, has some new wild technological thing in it that is about to become a new big technology. Like Back to the Future 2, it's doubles with a moving camera.
Once
you start getting motion control, then you start getting into actual like motion capture performances for things like Beowulf and Polar Express and Panda Express, Polar Express.
Dude, you're hungry. I'm hungry too, man.
I have not eaten today. Every movie he's done, and even his more recent stuff, like Welcome to Marwen, which I will admit haven't seen because reviews weren't great. But like he's still trying to push the envelope technologically.
he has a history of making some really big swings, really taking some big swings. And sure, not all of them are able to jump the uncanny valley. And like you said, not all of them are everybody's cup of tea, but you cannot deny that those films were at the very least stepping stones technologically to get us from point A to point B. You have to take these big swings to get anywhere technologically like that.
Like him or not, that is what makes Zemeckis a very integral director, I think, to just the fabric of Hollywood, is that he is always one that you know is going to push the envelope, even if it's for something as super simple as like Forrest Gump, where it's like, cool, we're going to have a fully CG ping pong ball. Like, we're going to have JFK have dialogue that we've written for him and have the face match.
And that's the stuff that you're doing on a daily basis now in After Effects. I mean, like, to do that ping pong ball, like back then it was how the hell did he do that? How did Tom Hanks really learn to play ping pong like that? It now no big deal, but then huge milestone, and compositing a character into a scene where there's massive explosions just right behind your main guys, like in Vietnam and in Forrest Gump. You know, that huge effects for the time.
And hearing like Zemeckis's resume, especially now, totally understandable why he eventually gets kind of tapped to make this movie. I'll be honest, reading just the basic of what the book that this thing is based off of is, this sounds like the wildest, weirdest, and I don't know in a good way book I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I have not read it myself, but the cliff notes are bizarre at least.
Yeah. So it was originally a book called Who Censored Roger Rabbit? Was written in 1981 by Gary K. Wolfe. I do love this. A sequel book was written that was Who Plugged Roger Rabbit?
You couldn't help yourself, could you?
I couldn't. And it's, with how it's written, it's like, how the hell is that supposed to be? But this book kind of hinges on a different thing. So instead of the characters being cartoon characters, like in this, where they treat cartoons like the movies, in the book, they are like from comic strips. So there's a lot of comedy in it because every time they talk, it's a speech bubble. So there's apparently a lot of jokes done in the book because it's like you can see the speech bubble and it does a thing. Like, I don't really know. And whenever a toon has to do a dangerous stunt, like getting run over by a steamroller, a la Judge Doom, they create a duplicate. And that doppelganger will do the stunt and then fade away shortly afterwards. So the original book, it still follows Roger, but instead of it being just like Marvin Acme or R.K. Maroon, it's two brothers who kind of run the industry that he's a part of. And one of the brothers is murdered and Roger is murdered on the same night. And a duplicate of Roger, so basically his psychically projected stunt double is the one who goes to Eddie Valiant and is like, solve my murder.
And somewhere in there is a genie, I think. Yeah,
it goes so much weirder from there because like the barest that I've heard is that like the genie is that at some point, because like it's a known thing in the book that Roger is a hack. Like he is a no talent schmuck and yet is still successful. So apparently there's some point where they reveal, oh yeah, that's because he made a wish on a genie,
which he stole from somebody else.
Yes. I think he stole from the Acme or Maroon brother that he killed.
Yeah, the producer brothers, who they themselves were toons before making a wish,
and they wished to be human. Yeah, which is fucking wild. So like Roger got multiple wishes, so that's also like he wished for Jessica to love him. So she actually was in a relationship with one of the producer brothers and then got with Roger, and now the magic is wearing out. So she kind of like hates him. And it turns out like the night that the murders happened, like she was going to Roger's place to murder him, but he was over at the producer's place to murder him, and the murder, and oh no, I've gone cross-eyed. Like there's so many different like plots and betrayals and backstabbings and it is nuts.
Oh yeah.
Like the only real nugget that seems to have been introduced there that went anywhere is, oh, by the way, cartoons and real world people exist together.
Mhm.
That's it. That's the only thing that ties it together.
I think it's really interesting that the producers who were human were formerly Toons, much like Judge Doom. He was actually a Toon that disguised him. Sorry, spoiler alert.
Yes, sorry. But if you haven't seen it, what's wrong with you? Like, come on. It's Roger Rabbit.
Speaking of Judge Doom and his plot, I think I was way too young to even understand what the red car storyline was or anything like that. Like
it's a story thread that as a kid I was just like, okay, this goes over my head, but I know it's bad. I know he shouldn't do this.
As far as I kind of got the joke about him saying freeways, who's going to want to get on a freeway? And I was like, I know what that is. And those exist. So, but it's not too far off from a real life case involving General Motors, Firestone Tires, and Standard Oil of California buying up the old streetcars of Los Angeles just to dismantle them. And that was a real story. And also it was supposedly, as the story goes, the premise behind a proposed or scrapped third film in the Chinatown trilogy.
Yes, for those who don't know, there was Chinatown, and then there was a sequel made later called The Two Jakes.
Yep.
That Nicholson returns and directs.
And it would have been the third film in that series called Cloverleaf, which is the company that Judge Doom owns that bought up the red cars to dismantle them so he could build a freeway. Bizarre, right?
Yeah. It's also a kind of weird movie to go back to as an adult and realize that whether it's like discussed in the movie or not, it's one of the few movies where the bad guy wins. Like technically, because if you live in a city that has a freeway going to and like you're like, well, I know that Toontown isn't on my morning commute. So clearly, like they paved, instead of they paved Paradise and put up a parking lot, they paved Toontown and put up a freeway. Like it's, so that guy technically wins.
Well, what I love is that there's been a lot of speculation online, a lot of fan speculation about where exactly Toontown is. Now, this is just something for me that I really enjoy. If you listen to Judge Doom at the end of the film, he talks about he wants to run a freeway from Los Angeles to Pasadena. And if you look back in history, the first freeway is the 110. The first freeway in Los Angeles was the 110. And so people like to speculate, where is Toontown exactly? So if you look on the maps, it's supposed to be, I guess, just east of Dodger Stadium. Some people say because they use the Griffith Park tunnels that it's actually over there closer to Burbank, where all the animation studios, the Walt Disney Animation Studios are, because that's obviously where they would have hired their Toons to appear in their films, so that's how that would have worked. So, but just fun fact, Toontown is just probably east of Dodger Stadium.
And something that I think is interesting, like a movie like this, a movie like Roger Rabbit, you have to make sure that the dynamic of your cast works perfectly. One person who like doesn't quite get it or plays the joke wrong, like the whole thing kind of falls apart. And it's a really technical movie as well. So with casting, obviously the people they cast brilliant, and we'll talk more about them in just a moment. But I want to talk for a second about the alternate casting. So the people who almost kind of were brought into this movie and for whatever reason didn't. So first and foremost, Eddie Valiant, right? You lead, you got to have that right vibe. Harrison Ford, who they went to first, but deemed way too expensive. Chevy Chase was the next pick, and he just wasn't interested. Bill Murray was the next on there, and they really liked his kind of wit. But anyone who knows the myths of Bill Murray knows that offering him a part is kind of a crapshoot if he's going to actually hear that offer. So that, as the story goes, they made an offer, but because it was such a weird system, he literally never got it.
What I had heard is that they just couldn't find him.
Yeah, because I know nowadays he's like, leave a voicemail on this service. I don't have an agent, so just leave me a voicemail. And if I hear it, sure, I'll get back to you, maybe.
Yeah. Somebody had asked him about this, and he said he had read an article interviewing Zemeckis talking about, hey, we wanted Bill Murray to play this first, and we couldn't get a hold of him. Bill Murray apparently just shouted out loud because he really wanted that part.
Well, there you go. And then Eddie Murphy was the next one. And Eddie was the first to just be like, I'm going to paraphrase, but he was basically like, I don't get the concept. He was like, this idea, I do not think this can work. I do not think this is a good idea. Like, I'm just not the right guy for it. And he's gone on record as saying, like, professional regrets. This is actually like he mentions 2, and this is one of them. And he's like, I did not get it. And as soon as I saw the movie, I was like, oh shit, okay. Like now I get it. I get exactly what they were trying to do. This would have been amazing to be a part of.
I think the other one he said was Rush Hour.
Yeah, it was something like that. They also apparently had offers out to Robin Williams, Robert Redford, Edward James Olmos, Jack Nicholson, which I think is funny considering the potential of the Chinatown
that
vibe.
would have been brilliant.
Yeah. Or Charles Grodin.
I could see that.
Like Charles Grodin 100% has the I really don't want to be here vibe that I think could have been really funny for
and
Eddie.
That's
so
basically Eddie Valiant in the whole movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But they brought in Hoskins, and Spielberg had seen him do some theater in the UK. And he said what he really liked about Hoskins, which was what kind of cinched it, was he had a pretty persistently hopeful demeanor, and he looked like he belonged in that era. Like if you were to see him, he's like, yeah, he looks like he's of the time period. There's some podcasts I listen to where they joke about like period movies, and it's like, does this person give off the vibes that they know what an iPod is? Like there's some like you look at Clint Eastwood, that man does not know what an iPod is.
And that dates the interview that you're reading too, because an iPod, now the newer generation won't know what an iPod is either. So that's
very true. When it came to the villain, for the thing, we have Doom. A few of the people they brought in, Tim Curry apparently did a screen test for it, and he was too terrifying.
Yep, that checks out.
Which is hilarious. That is the second time I have heard that rationale for why Tim Curry has not gotten a particular part. It was this, and it was Joker in Batman the Animated Series. Christopher Lee. Which, like, okay, I could see the kind of ominous Christopher Lee. He turned it down. He was just like, nah. John Cleese. They offered to him, and after he screen tested, they were like, you know what? You're not scary enough. F. Murray Abraham and Peter O'Toole. So it's like, all right, they had a definite vibe that they were kind of going for.
And I think that's really interesting because all the bad guys they were looking for, they were looking at British actors. And then they cast Christopher Lloyd, not British. And they're looking to cast the American detective, and they hire a British actor.
Yeah. and Lloyd, obviously, like he had just worked with Zemeckis and Spielberg on Back to the Future. And I believe right before this, he had been in Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. So like, apparently he loved the idea of doing this because he's like, villains are great. Like they get to be big, they get to be larger than life, and I get to have a lot of fun in those.
And apparently he likes scaring children, because have you seen him in Dennis the Menace too?
He's well, his dental work is horrifying in Dennis the Menace. Now, the only other actor who I could find a lengthy kind of story on, not lengthy, but about the almost casting is Roger himself. Charles Fleischer, plays Roger in the finished film, actually had a costume made that he wore every single day on set that was like the white furry bodysuit, the red suspenders, and a hat with some ears. And he perceived it as like, it's not a vocal performance, it's an off-camera performance. So he was just standing off camera, still doing every single scene.
And I heard a funny story about that just because he was on set in that costume, a lot of the crew and the people around were actually getting nervous because they thought, is this what the movie's going to look like?
They thought it was going to be a Harvey situation. Yeah, where it's like, oh, so it's just a dude in a bunny costume that everyone's like, yep, that's a rabbit. But the only other actor that they had, and this actor actually got through quite a few stages of the early development of the movie, was Paul Rubens. So the early drafts of this movie, back when when Zemeckis and Spielberg were first being attached to it, before Zemeckis made Romancing the Stone and Back to the Future, they had this design for Roger where he was kind of more visually the 1950s detective, the raincoat, and Paul Rubens did the voice for all of those early animation tests. And like when they were first putting this together, it was right before like Pee-wee exploded. So they were kind of getting him like right in before he was like a big name and everyone kind of knew him. And then just the visual of the character kind of changed. So they kind of moved away from that voice.
That would be such a different vibe altogether. Cause it would have brought this real innocence to the character that I don't think would have really hit with all that Tex Avery kind of slapstick violence,
Yes. And I like the final design of Roger. They said that they there were three things they were looking for with the design of Roger when they were updating him from that original Paul Rubens version. They wanted the technical expertise of a Disney. So like drawn with a certain level of technical expertise. The wit of a Looney Tune and the comedy of a Tex Avery. Those are the three things they were like, the character's got to have that.
But they said, but not quite as violent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fun that they were able to kind of put that together into a design for Roger that is very kind of iconic now, you know, like, I mean, when you think of Toon Rabbits, you know, the list is relatively short. Roger's on it.
So, fun fact, when they shot this film, they had rubber doubles for Roger that they could physically hold and have as reference for where he would be and everything. They would shoot that, and then they would shoot a whole other take without it, where everybody's just pantomiming everything. So the entire cast had to undergo these mime trainings so they could really understand what it was to hold these characters with no weight and everything. So they have a reference. And from what I hear, Bob Hoskins was one of the strongest at getting his eye line right.
Yes. Every interview I've read has said that Hoskins like nailed the eye lines so much so there's actually a quote from him where he's like, I thought I legitimately went crazy because I was still talking to a cartoon rabbit months after we finished filming.
Oh yeah. He supposedly he said that his mental health was actually affected by this because he said he was talking to somebody one day and just saw one of the weasels on top of her head while she was just like looking at him, and he thought he was going crazy.
God, Bob Hoskins is such a mensch. I love that dude. At some point, there's another movie of his that I might force us to talk about because it's wild, and some might say it needs a curtain peeled back on it. And to go along with that kind of puppetry, or like, you know, not puppetry, to go along with that kind of mime training that they had to do, one of the things that I was reading about that I thought was really, really interesting on set was for certain things where a physical movement or like a physical object had to interact with stuff. So for example, when Roger takes the shot for the first time, you know, so when Maroon hands him the shot glass and then he throws the shot back and tosses the glass over his shoulder, they actually built robotic puppets that would just be like, here's Roger's arm. So it would have a cradle for the drink. It would take it, it could throw it back and then toss it. And the animators would then have to animate frame by frame over every single one of those. So it gave them an internal structure for the character, but also gave the actors a physical thing to be acting against in certain scenes.
Yeah, and there were some really monstrous technical achievements there too. I mean, like with the robots that they made for that. I mean, there's Zemeckis again, just like pushing the envelope, taking big swings. They invented robots that would pick up a plate, smash it on its head, pick up a plate, smash it on its head.
And then something that I know I caught in the movie when I was a kid. I didn't realize what exactly it was until I got older. There's a lot of animator Easter eggs in the background of a lot of shots, like animator names that are kind of put in, you know, where they're like, oh, like the one I remember is like, there's like, oh, for a good time, call this person. And it, like when Eddie's like in Toontown and he goes into the bathroom that's just not there, and he fall like on the wall, like there's an animator's name that's like written under that kind of thing. And I think that's really fun because I know that happens on, it's weird to say like on real world productions too, because this was that, but in a real world set. You know, it's like I know in Star Trek shows, like there's always the plaque that you'll see on any of the starships that's like, this was our chief of staff, this was our radar technician, this was our this, and all the names that are on there are like your ager distresser, your scenic painter, you're that, and it's like, yeah, we're putting our names somewhere in the background because maybe we didn't get credited in the final thing how we wished we would. So the story goes that at least with Roger Rabbit, there were a few of the animators that were on a particular crew that were kind of helping with the workload. And they found out they were going to be credited as additional animation, as if they didn't like help build whole sequences. Cause this is the crew that like built the Toontown, like that whole section. They were doing all of that animation. You see where I'm sitting here? Like they were doing all of this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so they were doing huge sequences in the movie. So they were bummed they were going to be credited as additional animation. So they tossed their names in there as Easter eggs. So when you watch the movie now, when they get to Toontown, any of those names that you see tucked in the background that's going to be one of your animators, and that's going to be a fun little thing to kind of catch next time you watch the thing.
So one of the other technical hurdles they had to overcome on this one was the fact that the camera was moving. This is something that, even me as a VFX supervisor on productions, is when it comes to cost saving measures along the way, is the rules of camera movement. If you can start with locking it off and not moving your camera, that's ideal. And then from there it gets progressively expensive. And when they made this movie at the time, there were plenty of movies that existed before this that incorporated live action with animation. You had Pete's Dragon, you have
Poppins.
Mary Poppins, exactly.
Bedknobs and Broomsticks, I think.
Oh, that was a favorite of mine, even though it was. Everybody says it was terrible, but I loved it.
I don't remember it. I just remember Angela Lansbury. That's all I remember. I don't even know who she is in that movie. I just know she's in it. That's all I remember.
She's basically she plays a witch that is just found a
sounds like
book
Angela
of
Lansbury.
magic. Yeah. So she's amazing. Animation and live action coming together, that's existed before, but there were these techniques that were done that other production companies wouldn't do because it was just too costly and took too much time. So Robert Zemeckis, when he was talking to animation companies, they all told him, don't move the camera. It's going to, be harder. And Zemeckis, he eventually talked to animation director Richard Williams, and he told him, no, you can move the camera. It's just going to be more expensive and take a lot more time, but you can move the camera. So then Zemeckis, being the envelope pusher he is, said, let's do it. So they had a lot of camera movement in it. But one of the technical hurdles to that is that when you're animating on twos, as you typically do now, for the uninitiated, animating on twos means you're animating 12 frames a second as opposed to the 24 frames a second that live action film is shot at. So if your camera is holding still, animating on twos isn't a big deal. But every time your camera moves, if you're on twos, there is a sort of a stuttering that happens. And
because your camera's moving, but your character isn't.
Yeah, exactly. If the camera's moving, the animators had to animate on every single frame. That's 24 frames a second as opposed to the 12 that they were traditionally used to. And besides that, it wasn't just the animating on ones that made it so seamless. Was a big factor was that they animated the lighting, the shadows. They did everything with the color to really match what was around them. And that wasn't really seen before then. And after Roger Rabbit, you are going to start to see tons of scenarios where they're integrating live action and animation, where they are incorporating these lighting techniques, these shading techniques, multiple passes, where they would combine these layers to do shadows and highlights and everything. You start to see a lot of that in TV commercials in particular, like Cheerios and Tony the Tiger and, and all of them.
Yeah, this did kick off a trend of having animated characters interacting with real world people.
And the quality of it had only gotten better since then because of that.
Yeah. Well, and to go along with that, and this is something that I thought was really interesting. So prior to Who Framed Roger Rabbit coming out, the record holder for most optical composites, layering in those digital effects, was Return of the Jedi. It had 300 optical composites, is kind of what they referred to them as. Guess how many this one had?
Tell me, Logan, how many?
1,031 optical composites.
Good Lord.
This movie had 3 times as many as the record holder a year or two earlier.
That's crazy. It is such a leap. It is in a short amount of time. Because now you have a movie that is no CGI, has 1,500 visual effects shots in it. It's just crazy.
Or something that looks like it has no visual effects, where it's like, oh no, it's all there, but it's just like making sure the background works. This movie also marks a weird, I don't want to say legal first, but this is, I think, the first and only time that Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse appear on screen together. Part of the legal distinction with it was I think they literally had to be on screen for the same number of frames. So it was the mix of Bugs and Mickey and Donald and Daffy.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say it wasn't just the two of them. It was if there was Warner Brothers IP and Disney IP, they had to be balanced like that.
Yes,
and leave it to a Spielberg production to be able to merge these opposing and really competing IPs into a single film. That leads to something like Ready Player One down the line, where he's got all these crazy IPs from different production companies. I don't know how he managed to do that, like even just on a legal basis,
Yeah.
what like
there's
all the
a
rights that are
Wilder
involved.
IP poll
Oh,
that came out more recently. We're actually going to talk about it in a
Mm.
few here. I also think it's funny in that scene with Mickey and Bugs, like because of the legal whatever. Bugs could only refer to Mickey as Doc, and Mickey could only refer to him as Bugs. Never Bugs Bunny. Had to just be Bugs. You'll notice, if I recall correctly, in the scene with Donald and Daffy, I think someone in the audience mentions that it's them, but like Donald never calls Daffy by name and Daffy never calls Donald by name. Like any successful thing in Hollywood, there have been sequel pitches. One actually had a title, actually had a concept, and was seemingly very close to getting made until Spielberg kind of stepped in. And that one was called Roger Rabbit and the Toon Platoon. It was a prequel where Roger fights in World War II against the Nazis, has a platoon of, obviously Toon soldiers, hence the Toon Platoon. And by the end of the movie ends up, in Hollywood to kind of start his journey there. I'm guessing a little bit of Rin Tin Tin, because Rin Tin Tin's whole backstory was, he was a war dog and then kind of came back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
But at the beginning of the movie, one of the opening jokes in Toon Platoon is that Roger is told by his human parents that he's adopted. So throughout the movie, one of the main story threads was like he's trying to find who his dad is. And I think from what I read in the finale, when he makes it to Hollywood, he finds out through records that Bugs Bunny is his father. Which is also wild, because you're then kind of portraying a character from a franchise you don't have as a deadbeat dad, which is a weird kind of thing to put on another character.
Deadbeat or ignorant to the fact that he exists, but in either case, I don't want to think about Bugs, getting it on. I mean,
much like I don't want to think about Palpatine getting it on. Yeah, it's not.
No.
I don't want to imagine that at all. No. All right, so Toon Platoon was in development, script got pretty far, and then like Spielberg was always the guy who had the final say on it. And he heard that pitch and he was like, no, because I don't like the Nazis being made into a cartoony kind of thing. And it's like, you know what? That is 100% fair. That is totally a great fair rationale. Oh, yeah. Totally understand it.
Yeah.
So then in 1998, there was another version they were going to do. It was going to be an early mix of 2D animation and 3D animation for like when Roger's moving, doing that. They did a test thing of footage on it just to show that it's like, hey, we can still do this. The animation can still look great, and it was 1998. So it was like the same kind of tech that, that Roger Rabbit had pushed into something like Space Jam in a good way, where it's like, yeah, the real person in the animation and vice versa works really well. And Spielberg liked that one. Like whatever the story pitch was for that, he was on board with that one. And then it just, for whatever reason, kind of fell apart. As of that, so like I know when they made the original movie, they made a few Roger Rabbit shorts. They made it like a few like commercials that were like for like Diet Coke and McDonald's or something that were Roger Rabbit. But those animation tests in 1998 were the last kind of on-screen appearance of Roger Rabbit for a very long time, until 2022. Yes.
I don't think I know about this one.
Oh,
or maybe I do, and I don't.
Maybe you do. I'm going to give you a few hints and see if you can get it. And if the audience is paying attention, they're probably screaming it. But hey, that's funny to
me.
So this is a movie that, in terms of the world that it's building, feels like a spiritual sequel to Roger Rabbit. Features animated characters in a real world environment. Features animated characters treated as actors in a thing that is animated, and treating that like it's just a movie. Like, oh, hey, we did this animated series. We had to cast animated actors.
I feel like this is super obvious and I'm just not catching it.
Please continue. It is from The Lonely Island. From 2022, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers.
There you go.
Yes.
I did enjoy that movie.
It's a great movie. And the fact that at one point they open up a freezer and you see things from Disney frozen fish sticks, Ice Age, which is like a Sony property.
Yeah.
There. And then a Looney Tune thing. The IP hurdles they had to jump through. But Roger Rabbit does appear in Chip 'n Dale. Have you seen the Chippendale
Oh
movie?
yeah, I love that movie. Has no right being
Yes.
as good as it is.
Not even a little bit. So right before Chippendale break up, they're having their party in the height of the 80s. And one of the attendants of this dance party is Roger Rabbit. And he's on the dance floor and he's like, like he's doing his thing. He's having a great time.
He was doing the Roger Rabbit with Roger Rabbit. That's right.
But that is like from the end of the 80s into the early 90s up until that is the first on-screen appearance of Roger Rabbit in at least 20 years.
That's wild. And thank you for reminding me of that, because I really did enjoy that movie, and my memory, apparently it's gone. I don't know, but
something else that I'm also very curious about. So the guys who directed Chippendale, they are also doing another project that on paper I should be worried about, but simply because they are directing, I feel a little more like, okay, like if their comedy style is doing it, I have faith in it. And that is the sequel that is currently being made. That's right. Sequel, not remake, to The Naked Gun with Liam Neeson as the son of Leslie Nielsen.
Wait.
So
I guess that adds up. Yeah.
Liam Neeson is Frank Drebin Jr.
All right.
And lest we forget, like Leslie Nielsen also like began his career as a dramatic actor. Like he was a drama dude. And then Airplane threw him into comedy, and he was there for the rest of his career.
One of my wife's favorite old school films is The Poseidon Adventure. And he was the captain, I believe, on this Poseidon.
He's also in one of the segments of Creep Show, and he is terrifying in it. Like he's really good as a dramatic performer. But
and I'll tell you, he really scared the crap out of me in Dracula Dead and Loving It too.
Yeah, like you say that, like again, that might be another movie that I force us to talk about it, because after, I kid you not, after Young Frankenstein, that is, I think, one of my favorite Mel Brooks movies. Like I unapologetically love Dracula Dead and Loving It.
And I think it's a lot of people's least favorite, but it's one of mine favorite too.
At one point, I went through and watched a lot of Mel's movies. Life Stinks, way worse. Dracula Dead and Loving It's a ton of fun comparatively.
Well, I can't wait for us to talk about that one.
Yeah. Roger Rabbit is, I think, one of those movies that, and I could only kind of speak for myself, but I think you kind of mirror the sentiment. It is one of the earliest movies I can think of that really had me hit with the magic of movies. Not only is this impressive to see, but once you start actually thinking about the behind the scenes of it, it's how the hell did they do this?
I know. Yeah.
And hearing every step of kind of how this movie came to development and how it finally got put on screen. It is a miracle that this movie not only got made, but is as coherent and just well put together as it is.
And it's one thing to have just a movie with this gimmick of live action and animation, but you've got a solid story, solid detective story here that really holds up all the way through. And even when your characters are absolutely ridiculous, everybody there is treating it it's a very serious story.
It functions as a brilliant film noir and as an animated comedy, and proof that it is the story works. Like Cool World.
Yeah.
Cool World is one of those movies. It's a detective. It's a partially animated world. That movie bombs. Nobody talks about that movie. It was not well received. Roger Rabbit needed more than just the animation and the real world. It needed, like you said, a story that could carry it through and make it this really cool thing. And
to think that you got that story from such a bizarre book that
100%, like,
to bring it right back around to the beginning of this.
I'm really glad that censoring Roger Rabbit was what they went with instead of,
do it. Come on, do it again. Do it again. Yeah.
I say it like that. When it's not past tense, it sounds dirty.
Yeah. Well, Logan, let's leave it at that.
Let's leave it at that. That's a great note to leave our thoughts on Roger Rabbit.
Let's let's throw it to the viewers. I mean, please tell us in the comments, how did this movie affect you? What are your memories of this? Is there anything particular about this that you thought was just so cool? I mean, I loved how they shot those scenes where Eddie's driving the cab around, and like that, just mind-blowing effects like that.
When he's driving the cab, how when they needed a stunt double, they just drew an animated Eddie. Like little things like that. It is one of those movies, every time you watch it, you catch something new. So sound off in the comments below. Tell us,
or maybe their favorite cameo in there. I mean, that you might
not
even know.
Who's the one cameo that you were like, that one was speaking to me? Like everybody else, that was for you. That character was for me. Yeah.
Tell us in the comments below, please. And Logan, I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact that, Logan, you and I have done a at-home table read of Who Framed Roger Rabbit on your YouTube channel.
Oh man, that was a wild read. I don't know if I took had food poisoning that entire the whole back half of that reading.
Oh goody.
So
that ought to make it even more exciting. So people should definitely. I will link to that in the description below as well.
For those who don't know, I have my table readings on my YouTube page. Got food poisoning when we did the original reading for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I was Eddie, so it wasn't like I wasn't on camera. And the entire back half, every single time I finish a line of dialogue, I go off camera because I am getting sick.
I'm not going to ask which end. But
but
I'm sure it involved the dip.
It was. I was making some dip, and it was not pleasant.
All right. Well, with that, let's Logan, tell the people where they can find you.
Well, especially if they like all that talk of dip. I'm
you made it so appealing.
I'm. You can find me on Instagram at FilmGuy1989, on Twitter at FilmGuy89, and you can find me on YouTube. LP Actor 18, I think is what that one is. It's been a while for that, but at-home table reads with a quarantine theater company. That's where I do a lot of the stuff on YouTube. How about you, Jake? Where can they find you?
You can find me at VFX2Go on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Threads. One of these days, I'll actually post something in Threads, and we'll figure that out. But and you can find us on our website, vfx2go.com. On a weird note to kind of leave us on, because I want to start with this earlier, proof that when they created Judge Doom, they just wanted someone evil. He was originally scripted as the guy who kills Bambi's mom. What a dickhead. Mic drop. And you know what? That's the best way to end this episode. Yeah. All right. I've been Jake. I've been Logan. Judge Doom killed Bambi's mom. Judge Doom killed Bambi's mom. Yeah.